All right. Okay, so our intentions, and then moving on to the next part is we want to make sure that we're continuing to cross-pollinate. So as we're serving on the other work groups, just an opportunity to kind of elevate what we're hearing. And so also Vanessa and I, as we cross all the different work groups and working with all of you, we want to try to bring things forward. So you might hear us bring up different things that are connection points. And so I think that will be great for us to hear today from some of the others. So what we're going to do is just a quick review. We don't need to go into a review of where we are with the timeline. I know we've done that in the past, but in talking through, this is just for you to kind of know where we are from last time to now. So you could look at that if you'd like. And we do have, and I don't know if we've talked with you all, but we do, well, maybe I should look at it. Sorry, we do have a new deadline where things are going to be starting to move a little bit quicker. So if you would just click on that April 26th is kind of going to be a new deadline for us. So if you look on here, so if you can find me, I'm just going to highlight that top box. You can see April 25th, and then the framework where we are. For our work group, we're moving at least to have a first rough draft by that date, because we will need to get feedback for the larger group, the larger advisory group by then on the framework, just so that gives you all time to do some editing based on their feedback before it will need to go out statewide for some feedback.
Beth.
I know. Yeah, we're moving fast, moving and shaking. I know, we'll get there. We're really excited. It's moving now where we're like starting to kind of pull out some things. And that's what I'm excited to share is from previous discussions and the review, and then what you all have been working on. We're able to start to kind of see some themes. So we just wanted to kind of check if kind of like a pulse calibration with you all, if that sounds right. So yeah, so what do you feel? How are you feeling about that timeline?
Fast.
Yeah. And again, it's draft. It's a draft that we can get feedback on, but it would be like a really solid draft that this group, the framework group, would take to the larger advisory group. So yeah. Okay, so the cross-pollination, what we wanted to do is just share some of the work that's been happening. So if you click on, earlier, we didn't share with the standards group what the engagement group is, because what we want you to know is that there's a Jamboard that they've created. There's some different data points that they've been looking at, and they've compiled it into this Jamboard that you can find here. So you can review it in preparation for our meeting at the end of the month, just to kind of like ground yourself on what's going to be discussed. But we have some questions from the engagement group that will kind of facilitate some discussion with you all to get some input, and what are you noticing, and then things to consider. And so that is there. And then with the standards group from earlier, there is a document that I wanted you all to see what was coming out of there, and it's their recommendations. And so this is the start of their recommendations. So this is another one we want you to be aware of. We didn't get it linked in here. I'm going to do it right now. So I'm going to put it in the chat. I'm going to give you just a moment to take a look while I put that in our agenda. Okay, added. So Holly was in our group earlier for the standard. So Holly, feel free to kind of share out to just like what you were experiencing, or and I could talk to the process too of what we did. And Holly, you can even speak to that.
You can start, Beth, and I will fill in. How does
Yeah,
that sound? You're
yeah.
looks
So
like you're doing a good job.
yeah, great, thanks. So what, thank you. Yeah, so what we did is we had the standards group review different standards that they wanted to elevate from other states, other sources. And two of the ones that really stood out to the group were California's socioemotional learning standards, as well as the transformative socioemotional learning resources and articles that will be hyperlinked here. Apologies, we didn't get that linked in advance for you all. And then when we had discussion about what was being elevated, we asked the group then to make some decisions, or basically not consensus, but like where are you all feeling like, are you all in agreement with the things? And in this box were the areas of agreement for everyone. And it was really nice. It was such a great conversation. And so you can see here what this box here, what should the SEL standards include? So there was an interest in the five transformational SEL constructs, the focal constructs is what they're calling it, and also Castle's 5 competencies, and then talking with a larger group about how can we blend those together. There was a really strong interest in that. And then some other things to consider. You can see here's the table of kind of a comparison between the two, where they're, oops, don't want to move it, they're aligned. There's also the image here. And then some other points are these bullets down below. So there was about a focus on the adult piece. And then developmental progression was another area that was elevated. Providing educator strategies within there, within the framework, within the standards. And then calling out what California did is they called out pitfalls or like implications, potential areas to consider of how those standards could, Holly, help me too. I think it was like how they could negatively impact students, different focal groups, and just kind of made that explicit of like, if you don't do this correctly, this is what potentially could happen.
Yeah, it was like the article that we read from a long time ago about SEL is, could be white supremacy with a hug, for example. So just thinking about how it could be horribly wrong. And then also, I think one of the things was not looking at it as like a lockstep either, so that is progression, and different students are different places at different time depending on what's happened and trauma and the day, etc. So it's not a linear progression, and not hard and fast. This is what you should know by first grade, or you get held behind, held back, is what I'm trying to say. So um, is that what you wanted me to say, Beth?
Yeah, perfect. Yeah, we just had a little bit of a laugh because we were talking about how our own developmental progression as an adult could happen throughout the day at any moment, like
That's what I
whatever is
said.
happening with us. So we were just kind of like, yes, we shouldn't be, like you said, a lockstep. It can sway at any time, and we might even regress at times. So, I'm just thinking of with me and my kids sometimes.
A
And then,
daily thing with me, Beth. I'm not at my
yes,
best self with my children.
yes. The other key thing, one of the things that came out of there too is the adults. So, Kristen, this relates to your work too at TSPC. Is like, is there a way to kind of look at ways we can align some of the adult standards, competencies, things that that you all are working on? So that was something that was just kind of mentioned during that time. And then down below is how should the socioemotional learning standards be developed? So there was some discussion around that, and that was kind of like where there was a really strong interest in like really people really loving the we statement. So it's more of like us coming together, but then there was an interest in keeping the I. So like, the individual self versus kind of the collective, the we. So could we do both? or should we have one? So there was like a really interest in almost both, having both be how we would move forward. And then the other part was a crosswalk to some of those other content areas. So that would be with like Oregon, American School Counselor Associations, standards for school counseling, the health standards, ethnic studies, early learning, kindergarten guidelines. So all those different areas, or whether it be some alignment. Also, we might even want to look at alignment with, I heard someone say like the work that's happening in other initiatives and programs. So like SIA, SSA work that's happening. So that there could be some alignment there as well.
Or even that, some of that might not require a crosswalk as much as a calling out of that. We think about implementation of SIA or allowable uses of the funds, or even just the meeting that we came from when we think about mental and behavioral growth targets. Because my constant concern, and I think that ODE, currently is moving more towards this direction, but my constant concern is that districts or school leaders or educators or parents or anyone sees all of these as separate and discrete initiatives that don't impact one another, but that SEL standards are also about how we instruct. And it ties into our content standards, our instructional practices, and ties into how a district might want to use its funds, which can also impact everyday matters and attendance, which can also impact, so it's like calling it out where there's alignment versus it sort of being standalone.
And in our group, and I think that at some point we're going to really need to like intentionally bridge the gap between ODE and TSPC in this. Like we're talking a lot about the alignment to like in-task standards and like teacher performance and like the evaluations that teachers do to like demonstrate the quality of teaching. And so I think a lot of these standards are going to be, I think, aligned really directly to those like those in-task type standards. And so I think, I think we're going to have to do some layering on the requirements that schools have.
I think that's such a good point to bring up, Kristen, because I think especially when you have like sample educator strategies and tools for each of the 5 categories, that could be a joint document with TSPC and ODE so that educators are seeing how closely that those align. Like when you really get into those model for teaching standards and in-task, how much of that just like kind of dovetails right into social emotional learning. That might even be an interesting way to like change the guidance around how you write your student learning and growth goals.
Great idea. Is there, would one of you be able to capture some of our thinking and discussion during this time? Sorry, I forgot to talk about if there was somebody that could help with note taking. I just don't want to miss some of these great thinking.
Yeah, I can write some stuff down. I think I do have to leave around when Holly leaves, but I will work on it until then.
What time do you both have to leave?
4:30-ish, or whenever my toddler gets home.
Or whenever
Should we just try to aim to wrap up right around then? Because that's like 50% of the group.
That sounds great. Yeah. So then we'll go down into the next section. So framework discussion. And what we wanted to do was share some of the main themes, big ideas. So I did my best to work on this, but I want your input. So this document here, the main themes, big ideas, if you click on that one, it will take us to a synthesis of what we've done so far. So this incorporates where we've done the review in November. We met with a smaller group, whoever could make it for the optional one in January, beginning of January. And we did the review of different states. And then also we have worked with you all to get some other specific states and other additional areas where they kind of have some frameworks. So like Ed Trust, as well as at the bottom is, where is the other one? There's Ed Trust and transformational SEL. So we just put it into one table. And what we've done here is all the comments. Vanessa and I have tried to look across all the different comments and pull out themes. So here, what we've done is we put the themes into these guiding, we just call them guiding principles for now, and we can change that. But these are the things that we're seeing. And we can change where some things are pulled out more or like sub, but this gives you an idea of like those reoccurring highlights. And this was around it was the question to you all in one of the last documents you worked on was, what should we focus on? Where should we take action? And so these were those pieces. And then for the other documents, it was like, what do we want to highlight and bring forward from these? What can we learn from these other states? So I'll give you a moment to look at these guiding principles up here at the top. And just as you're looking, what seems to like resonate with you? Where do we maybe need to think of like what else is missing? Or maybe what's not resonating?
So I think what's the interesting part is we have racial equity in there, but we don't have any other equity in there. So I know racial is part of it, but there are lots of other things that are built into equity too. So I wonder if we need to broaden that.
I was just thinking that too, Holly, that something around inclusion or differentiation or something like that could fall under equity as well.
So inclusion, sorry, what else I want to capture?
Differentiation.
Yeah, I think what was coming to mind for me was the idea of intersectionality. You know, especially when we intersect around race, language, different abilities, like I think about those English learners who are also Hispanic, who also have an IEP, who also are Title I, right? Where's the equity around sort of all the intersections of identity?
And you notice how the overarching is equity, and then here it's racial equity. So would it maybe equity be, I'm just wondering if maybe equity is out and it's, I don't know. And because it all falls under like universal, it's kind of all falling under universal, right? Like racial equity, inclusion, intersectionality. We're still talking about all students, right? All students, all adults.
It all falls under equity in general, right? We just
General, right.
I'm not sure why it says just racial equity.
That was one of the themes that it kept coming up throughout.
Are you talking about replacing the word equity with replacing, like swapping out some sort of like universal designs for instruction or some type of overarching category that looks like that?
I was thinking about swapping out C for just equity.
I see.
Except equity is like the category. Then you have like a bullet point called equity under the category of equity.
Category equity.
Oh, I see what it is, because it's the guiding principles for equity. I
Yes.
don't, I mean, maybe race is underneath there, but yeah, I mean, yeah. I don't know. It seems, I don't know.
Yeah.
Does somebody want to change what you're thinking? Just so we can try to all jump in and see what it could look like.
I think it's okay. Do you both think it's okay?
Yeah,
I'm kind of with you.
Like I've been on Zooms all day. I'm a little zoomed
Me
out.
too.
And I have like I have a 5:30 to 9 o'clock Zoom too. I'm just like, oh my God.
I'm talking about SEL frameworks and standards, and I don't even know what I'm saying anymore. So I was like, what am I thought it was good, and then I was like, no, it's not. So
no, I started just keep coming back to like what we mean about equity. Like we mean equity of outcome. Like when I think about equity and SEL, I'm thinking about students being able to be honored for themselves, educators being honored for themselves, like a recognition of the systemic inequities. I don't know. I'm not really being very articulate. I'm sorry.
No, you are. You're very articulate.
Yeah,
You know,
Andrea, I would say like equity is like access and opportunity and the outcomes, like you were just talking
Yeah.
about outcomes. So kind of like,
yeah, I actually kind of like that idea, like equity of access, equity of opportunity, equity of outcome.
I like that a lot. And then I think that you could make a category that's not just race, but encompasses more of an overall picture of someone's background and heritage, and that would encompass the language and the race and the, I don't know.
Kristen, you putting that in?
Made a comment.
Oh, perfect. Okay,
I
good.
will.
Thank you. And some under here, maybe you might want even to pull out even more, like systems change, systems and conditions was like a theme that kept running. And do we want that embedded within under equity, or do we want that pulled out? You know what I mean? Like, is it something that's like we like must like have this out as its own kind of standalone, something to think about? Yes, policies, practices.
Yeah, I mean, we've talked a lot about systems and systems being a huge barrier to the implementation of SEL. And so, does it need to be its own? Does it sort of have a place in each and every guiding principle? So I can think about what are the systems that have to change when we talk about how we partner with students, families, and communities? What are the systems that have to change around student and adult practices? What are the systems that have to change around implementation? Is it something that is sort of weaved throughout?
I also look at it as relationships. I feel like the guiding principles that should be in relationships, because all of this is done in the context of relationships, and that's missing from here.
Is that Holly, the partner with students, families, communities, does that hit the relationships? I mean, relationships.
No, I don't think it is, because I think it's all of these skills are done in the context of relationships. That's what social emotional learning is, right? It's
relational,
it's social, right? And so the whole thing is in the context of relationships. But I mean, yes, that's part of it, but I think we're missing the big like it wraps around. It's all in the relationships. Like I could know the standards like the back of my hand, but if I don't know how to connect with children, or I don't know how to connect with other adults in my building, then I'm not being very effective at SEL.
Yeah.
Is the issue with the word partner versus relationship or something broader than the word like partnering?
I don't.
That comment.
Sorry, go ahead, Andrea.
Well, I just made a comment on the document tied to the top level, but like a key idea being that SEL and learning in general is relational. I don't know if that maybe goes into like the definition or like sort of the way we phrase the framework. Key component of this framework is that this happens in relationship, right? Equity does not happen in isolation. Partnerships don't happen in isolation. Practice doesn't change in isolation. Implementation does not. None of this occurs in isolation.
Yeah, I like that. I like it if it would fit in a definition or at the top. That's what I'm thinking. But yeah,
right, and that kind of also ties us back to the idea of the transformative SEL really being focused on collective, and it's both an attention to the collective and the individual, but it is that thinking away from that deterministic white supremacy. I did it all by myself. idea because none of us actually do it all by ourselves.
Yeah. So that brings me to another thought isn't equity also across all these different areas as well?
Yeah.
Here we've called it out, and does that make it feel like it's separate from like how we have relationships, how we do our adult and student practices, how we implement something? That's another thing I'm thinking as I'm looking at this.
Maybe it needs to be like a circle graphic, kind of like the castle model, or I think it was Ed Trust that kind of had the kind of reframed to the size of the circles. But like, you know, integrated model of mental health is also circles. And so, you know, sort of those Venn diagrams where there's overlapping or there's sort of a wrapping.
It's almost kind of like an intertwining or wrapping or
like a braiding.
Yeah.
Yeah, and even with castles, of the community is on the outside, and so it's just interesting. It needs braiding and intertwining. But yeah, I'm going back to the word partner, Kristen, and yeah, I mean maybe it isn't because that's what I don't know. I don't think we know how to partner with those different people. Like we say it.
It's an interdependence, really.
Mm-hmm.
I like that.
I like it too.
Yeah, whenever I hear like about family school partnerships, it feels very like I will partner with you. It's not collaborative, and it's not we're not building relationships between families outside of school. I'm not building relationships with like, you know, so and so's extended family. Like it doesn't feel very connected. It feels like from an inside out, that's the partnership.
Mm-hmm.
And I think it's probably just the historical usage of that phrasing, but I think we could.
Or what happens when we use that phrase, like we're going to partner, and then the outcome, and then it makes you sort of look back at that word partner. And
partnering generally means that I'm sending something home.
And I know we've moved at ODE away from stakeholder to be partner. And so, yeah, thinking about, is there a better term to use?
I think that what you said, Andrea, was really
interdependence.
Yeah.
It's beautiful.
It is.
Hitting one home at 4:00 on a Thursday.
You are. You're still going. I'm brain dead, but you're good. Did we? Oh, you did write that.
In the comments.
And I wonder. So we call things. Here's another catchphrase that we use: the toolkit. But I don't really see that there are tools and kits that we have.
And who would something be for? A resource for who?
Right. It's a good point.
Yeah.
Is it for students? Is it for educators? Is it for both? Is it for community partners? How do they fit into this, etc.? So I'm curious.
Yeah, I think Angela Halo describes them as like student-facing resources or teacher-facing resources or family-facing resources, which I kind of appreciate. Then there's like some intentionality behind it instead of like a vague overarching term.
I just captured that on the side.
Did we talk about and in professional development too? Beth, I think is if whoever or Andrea, who's ever the note taker.
Yeah. Can we add that down in implementation?
Yeah, because I think that's a big piece of it is not only is it here you go, here's all those resources, you know, but there has to be some PD and scaffolding ongoing. Because again, we've seen rollouts of standards not go so well and frameworks in our state.
At
traditionally.
TSPC, we've been talking a lot about kind of the gap in having a warm handoff between like pre-service and in-service teaching, and describing a teacher's professional development as a continuum all the way from pre-service to post-service, and how we don't really have like a way to describe that in like a really meaningful and like longitudinal way.
Yeah. You're always developing, right? And a lot of times people think, oh yeah, I've done my teaching credential, I'm done learning, right?
You're just starting.
You're just starting, exactly. I'm still learning. If I could go back now, if only I could go back now.
I'm wondering if we could make some connections here to like reflection and
Beth,
growth. So like professional learning is a part of like growing and getting better at what we're doing. Hey, little one.
Sweet.
Hi.
I'm just making a note for implementation, sort of a continuous improvement and reflection model.
Yeah.
Commitment to lifelong commitment.
Yeah, and that aligns with what we heard earlier today from standards, was this interest in, calling out implementation. And it was kind of around this thought idea of around measuring, like how do we measure what we're doing? And like, could we measure implementation? Could we measure through continuous improvement? And so kind of like the two, using those to kind of like help get better at what we're doing and learning, growing.
How old?
Yeah, I think measuring implementation is actually a really fascinating area that school districts aren't really good at, even though there's a body of research that talks about how you can do that. But it takes a lot of reflection and growth, because it also means you have to change structures and systems when you recognize why the learning isn't transferring into changes in practice.
Yeah.
TDSA cycle. Kristen, how old is your child?
You're talking to me, sorry. She is 2.5.
Oh, sweet. She's tall.
She's very tall. Yes.
She doesn't look too.
No, she's very tall and very smart. Yeah.
Sorry, I got distracted by a child.
Yeah, that's good. Yeah, well, I was just thinking like implementation. So at ODE, we use it with the ORIS framework. I think there's also some elements with school improvement. And so I was just thinking of like how those are also connected, which then brings us to another point, as something that was kind of elevated in the other states that we reviewed, was that connection to school improvement and implementation and improvement efforts.
Say more about that, Beth.
Oh yeah, just in the other states, what we were seeing was people liked that there was a connection to school improvement efforts, whether it was like around goals or like incorporating socio-emotional learning in their socio-emotional learning, like connect that to their goals. That almost feels like kind of the metrics work that we're working on too, when we were just meeting for the mental health metrics. Like if a school is working on mental health metrics and then elements of socio-emotional learning or constructs are within those measurements, how can we use that as a tool to kind of measure like continuous improvement and get better at some of those pieces? But like really starting to look at that as part of our system. Sorry.
In a lot of ways too, it's kind of a recognition that if your school is really struggling, that the learning conditions are not optimal for students. Like rather than, oh, they just need more math instruction, which we know is not often the case. You know, maybe they need different math instruction, but there's something going on at the school that's deeper than just, we need another reading intervention.
Yeah. And I would just remind us too that these are just kind of those really high level, what we were trying to get at is like, what were we pulling out that were really high level themes, ideas of things that we liked. And so we can get, if you all are interested in, we can start to get in deeper and build out what those mean. So these different, so like, for instance, if we were thinking of a report, this could be the outline of a report, the outline of a framework that could be built off for like future, work that we do. We were just trying to land on like, what are those like bigger, higher level thinking first? Like, what are we seeing across?
Yeah, I think it's actually important because, when we were looking across the frameworks, one of the things I appreciated about some of the states was the brevity of the framework, right? The framework didn't try to address everything. It really kind of stayed in its lane and then pointed to other documents. So I wouldn't want the framework to try to be the all-encompassing document, because then I think it's not very useful. How do you keep it high level enough, detailed enough, sort of that sweet spot, so that people will engage with it and want to learn more about it and look at the tools related to it. So what of these things end up in guidance? What of these things end up in different implementation tools? What of these things end up in the standards, et cetera? Like California's, for example, which I know we all liked. California's, had other things that we did and didn't like. And others were harder to dive into. I think Washington's, while great, is it's like a 40-page PDF. It's less accessible.
Right, and I think I agree it needs to be highly accessible and written in language that is easily digestible for folks.
That was something that came up earlier, Holly, wasn't it?
Yeah, because yeah, for a lot of people who want to make it very academic, and while academic is great, it's not easily accessible for people, especially when they have so many other things to do. So it needs to be educator friendly. And I'm not saying educators are not smart, so that's not what I'm saying. I'm just saying that.
Yeah, but also like if community partners are interested in partnering, helping them understand pieces of this, or families will definitely be reviewing this as well.
Right, and it has to be in language that they understand as well, not our jargon.
I think too, sometimes we make assumptions that people know things or do things, but maybe this is an opportunity to kind of call it out and be explicit about certain things, what it looks like, feels like, sounds like.
Because even Beth, I'll say, do people know what CASEL is? And there are a lot of people that don't. Like, so we can assume that people know things. And no blame or shame to them, but it's just they're not in it. This isn't their world.
All right. So how does it feel so far with these? Is there anything we're missing
What's missing?
that you could think of? We could come back to it. You could come back to it between now and the next time we meet. The only thing is that we need to bring this forward to the advisory group on the 28th, which leads us into the next part of the agenda. So I'm looking at time, and I know you all are going to be leaving soon.
Oh, go with your final thoughts.
Yeah, I was just going to say that, so for the 28th, what we're wanting to do is we're going to do breakout rooms. And so everybody here would be able to just share this document that we were just looking at and just kind of be able to talk to like, hey, this is kind of like what came out of looking across states, the themes. And then just that's where we'll use that kind of process to say, like, what are you noticing? What's coming up for you? And so we were going to disperse all of you across those different breakout rooms to just talk about like the themes that they've been finding. We've been finding, asking what themes are they noticing, and then just get any feedback from them and document the feedback.
Yeah, like it would be nice if we could take a stab at sort of a statement at the beginning, knowing that it would be draft, grounding statement.
Like we believe type of thing.
I'm just thinking of like some of the other frameworks we looked at, which before I kind of went to the guiding principles, which is like a general statement. Like, yeah, it could be a we believe, it could be taking some of the whereas statements and operationalizing those kind of based on what we've had conversations about now.
Is that something we could start now? Is that something you'd want to get feedback on at the next advisory group meeting?
Yeah, I mean, unless there's not time to do it between now and the next advisory group meeting, in which case we'd want to get input on what kind of sentiments should go into such a part of the framework.
That's a good thing to just get feedback on that part, right?
Mm-hmm. Like, we know we want to have this section. We know we want it to be high level, accessible, useful. What are the kinds of, I'm going to use that word again, sentiments that you would want in that?
So there's lots
versus trying to maybe draft something ahead of time.
There's lots.
Because then we have until the 25th, right?
The April 25th? Yep.
Yeah.
For get something rough. Yeah, like a rough draft to them.
Okay.
Yeah.
I should go off camera for a minute, but I'm here listening.
Okay. So that could be something that we all mention at the larger advisory group, is like, we want to have like this introductory high level statement, and that then kind of would lead into the themes, or, you know, those kind of those guiding principles, or whatever we want to call those. We could figure that out. And so for both of those, we could get ideas, feedback from them of like, what do you think about this overarching?
Yeah, I think maybe in a not so open-ended way, Beth. I don't know how you'd structure that, because I feel like if we give it so open-ended, we're not going to get anywhere with.
Yeah, and I think everybody's going to say, yeah, like, we would love to have an overarching statement in the beginning that kind of sets the stage for the rest. But it seemed like it started to go with what Andrea, Holly, maybe you were saying, like the connection to like what we believe, or
Yeah.
like whereas.
That's what I was saying, that we believe.
Yeah,
I think
goes in.
sorry. I think yeah, we can connect it with the whereas statements, but I think it's more friendly if we use it as a we believe. If that makes sense.
And the idea of the purpose of the framework. This framework is intended to.
Yes. Both.
Just typing that in to the.
Thank you for picking up my slack.
Yeah, no, you're fine. We got each other. This is good. All right. Yeah, so this, we'll make sure to put that in for discussion in the breakout rooms, along with the kind of those high arching framework themes. Does everybody feel comfortable just kind of speaking to it, and then just getting people's feedback from the rest of the group? Yeah, it should be pretty easy facilitation. And then we'll also hear from the other work groups, people that are representing for the work of those as well. And so it looks like we're going to spend 20 minutes for each work group to just have some time to talk and then listen, and be able to use that for any kind of reiteration of their whatever you all are creating that will help you. And then, so next steps, it just looks like agenda items for next meeting. I think we're already starting to pull those out. Is there anything that you all want to carry over for next steps, as we're thinking and building out for our next work group meeting?
Is there a way we can get some feedback from other folks on the framework work group who aren't here?
Mm-hmm. Yep. Yeah, Vanessa will be sending out, so we'll send out the recording, these meeting notes, agenda, and then we'll make sure that the documents are linked, and then they can just kind of review. And then we need a way to get feedback from them. Andrea, that's what you're thinking, is get some input from those that aren't here.
Yeah, you know, we have a much larger group and would like to know, what do they think? Can they read the comments? Is, particularly before we go into the meeting on the 28th would be ideal.
How do you all want that feedback? Do you want it in where they've added comments to something, or there's a document we could create that they could then put in feedback?
Sorry, I was just gonna say, I was just looking at who's invited and who didn't come. There's only a few, Andrea. So just as
Oh, okay.
FYI.
The framework is a smaller group out
are
of
we?
between the
Okay.
other two. Yeah, a little bit
Yeah.
smaller. The other ones are a bit bigger.
Okay. Yeah, I think, adding comments and then with enough time for you and Vanessa to reconcile some of those comments. Like, here's what we discussed. You kind of follow it. Here's our plan for talking at the meeting on the 28th.
Perfect. So I'm going to put adding comments to artifacts. I did spell it right. Plan for the 28th. Great. Okay. All right.
What else do you need, Beth?
I think that's it. I feel in a good place. I think it was just if there was anything else missing from above in the framework synthesis document. If there was anything missing, we just wanted to try to capture it while we could. Love that we discussed the visual. That was something Vanessa and I were like playing with this morning, and we said, no, let's the group figure out what kind of visual would make sense to kind of like, we thought, is it puzzle pieces? Is it the circles? Really like the idea of that intertwining and the braiding.
It's like a rope that's braided or something. I don't even know what that looks like, but yeah. Or somehow intersection or overlap.
Holly, were you at ODE when we had been talking about the twigs in the bundle?
Yeah, sticks
Yeah.
in a bundle.
Sticks in a bundle.
I also was part of the group where they wanted to do a image of a tree and the roots and whatever,
Yeah.
and that was a whole big thing to do. And then I don't know if it went anywhere after I left, but yeah.
Yeah. You all probably have your own things that people bring up as like connections, interconnections.
Yeah, I don't know, but yeah,
Less than you might expect at TSPC. But
sticks in a bundle, even if you think about that, Beth, they're laying on top of one another and they don't go together, right? So
Yeah.
not quite sticks in a bundle, but maybe you know how they have those when you buy firewood and they're all intertwined.
Mm-hmm. Yep.
Or you get for a firewood. You know what I'm talking about. But I'm not good at those metaphors like that.
I know, me neither.
Someone's smarter than me.
Yep. I think that's it that we needed for today, just to try to land on those high arching themes. And like, I feel like we have really good feedback on the side we're gonna look at, and then we can rework. What we could even do is put it out to you all before the larger meeting and say, does this hit what we were saying? So like, if it wasn't quite hitting the target and we've put comments out to the side, we can adjust it.
You said we're on the 28th?
Yeah, the
Off
28th.
next week, Beth.
there's
And
not
I'm
much-
really taking off, so
Good.
I
Okay.
don't want to work next
All right.
week.
Well, let's move this forward for the first feedback from the larger group and then adjust, if that's okay.
Unless Andrea and Kristen want to work.
Sorry, I was.
Or are
daughter
we?
works
oh,
again.
I'll be at work.
I'm working like in the mornings next week, taking time off kind of in the
So
afternoons.
they'll do it.
All right. Okay. Well, I'll talk with Vanessa too and just see if there's any like revision to do before the larger meeting, and then we'll just reach out, and whoever can contribute would be great. If not, then just have like a week off.
Trust them. I trust them.
Yeah, well, thank you all for today.
Sure, everyone. Have a
This is
good
great.
evening.
All
Bye.
right. I'll see you all soon.
Bye.
Bye.
Hey, Beth, can I ask a question?
Yeah.
I'm like we paused